Evening, everyone. Tonight we'll be continuing the study of Joshua in preparation for Lads to Leaders this year. And before we get into it, my slides up. Oh, slides aren't up. Okay, there we go. All right. Tonight we'll be looking over Joshua 8, which everybody will know. This is basically part 2 of their conquest for Ai, because the first time around it didn't go so well. But this time there's more hope. Hope this time for the night. No sorrow or misery for Joshua this time around. So getting into it, when I think of this story, I think of it's more like a halftime kind of way, more like they're coming out of halftime, getting into the third quarter, close to the fourth quarter. Here's some examples. If everybody remembers Super Bowl 52, and if you're familiar with social media, you'll see this a lot, basically just making fun of the team on the right. But basically here, it's in the third quarter, it's 28-3. Halftime score was 21-3. And then over here to the right, here's a college score, OU Baylor in 2019. Halftime score was basically 31-10. OU's far behind, and Hurts was struggling to begin with that, just too many turnovers. But then what we notice here is that during halftime they make adjustments, try to ease the burden or just whatever's going on with them. But then what we notice here in the fourth quarter, things change, or at least things end in a different way than what they're supposed to be. As you see here, New England won the Super Bowl. It came back in overtime and won, and there's Tom Brady with his Super Bowl trophy, and then Bill Belichick on the right. And then to the other side, everybody thought Baylor was going to run away with it, but OU found a way to come back and win that one, all on the reins of Jalen Hurts that year. Basically, what the illustration here shows is that sometimes you don't start out like you want, but once you make changes, and what we saw last week is that Joshua and his army basically got massacred, and it didn't look bright for him, and they were like trying to figure out what adjustments do we need to make to be able to come back from this. And basically what we saw from last week is Joshua and the people basically took care of business trying to figure out what the problem was, and God told them, this is how you can make the adjustment. Go get rid of the sin that's within your within Israel. And so when they figured out it was Achan that was the problem, they made the adjustment in this case and basically got rid of it in a bad way, but it had to be done in order for Israel to be cleansed of their sins. So here, beginning in verses 1 through 2, we read here after they stoned Achan. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed. Take all the people of war with you, and rise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoils and its cattle you shall take as booty for yourselves. Lay an ambush for the city behind it." And we'll see later if they do as the Lord tells them to. But here, and then here's an illustration of Joshua planning out for the Israelites for the Ai attack. Ambush here, I've researched this. It's a noun for basically a surprise attack by people lying in wait in a concealed position. So when people come through, they won't know you're there. It's basically like a surprise attack, like you're not supposed to expect it, or the enemy's not supposed to expect it. And then a verb is like make a surprise attack on someone from a concealed position. So make sure that it's very secretive and nobody knows about it. If you tell people, then it's not really an ambush. It's just hey, this is our plan. This is how we're gonna stop you. I don't know if there's very many ambushes on what's happening in the news, but I just know that there's probably a few. But the others is not an ambush. Here in Joshua 1, we notice the halftime change-up is that Israel had to get rid of what was holding them back, and once they did, then they were ready to prepare for either the third or fourth quarter here, and which was to take over Ai, and then and as I said, Achan was that sin. This chapter is a lot familiar to chapter 6, which we talked about 3 weeks ago. Feels like 2 weeks, but in reality it's 3. But it was basically they took over Jericho, but they had a specific plan on how they were going to take over Jericho. And this time around, they do have a specific way of being able to take over Ai. So for this week, they're basically, God tells them that they're guaranteed to win this time around. So for the question before I give the answer, in comparison to chapter 7, what made this plan so different from what happened in chapter 7 with Joshua and his army?
He did exactly what God told him. Exactly.
Yes. To every word. They didn't leave a single word out. Is there another aspect that we're missing that made it so different? Or do we remember from chapter 7 what they didn't hear, or what they didn't do during that time? Or here's a good question. Did God even give them a command of what to do in chapter 7?
You're allowed to keep the stuff at the end,
Mm-hmm.
like all the booty and
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What I was...
If you're
Okay.
comparing the conquering of Jericho,
I meant chapter 7, like the instructions. Did God give any instructions in chapter 7? And the answer is he didn't. He didn't even say, there's nowhere that said in chapter 7 he gave any specific orders or commands. It was more like Joshua told the spies, hey, go scout the land and see if we can conquer. The spies said yes, and then Joshua went in. However, it didn't end as they were supposed to. But this time around, instead of relying on the spies, they relied on God's commands. While in chapter 7, it's in 7 verses 2 and 4, was basically just relying on the spies' report. And basically God didn't give a command on how they were to take over Ai because God wasn't with them at the time. And then, as I just said up there, here we see this time God has given Joshua the strategy and how he can how Israel can take it, or Ai, and that nothing was going to change. And also, what was mentioned earlier is that they were given specific command on what they could spare from what they were about to destroy in Ai, which was the spoil / booty, or the cattle. Cattle was to be spared. But then moving on. Joshua 3-8. So Joshua rose, and all the people of war to go up against Ai, and Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night. And he commanded them, saying, behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city, behind the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. Then I and all the city, but all of you be ready. Then I and all the people who are with me will approach the city, and it will come about when they come out against us as at the first, and that we shall flee before them. For they will come out after us till we have drawn them from the city. For they will say, they are fleeing before us as at the first. Therefore we will flee before them. Then you shall rise from the ambush and seize the city, for the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. And it will be, when you have taken the city, that you shall set the city on fire, according to the commandment of the Lord you shall do. See, I have commanded you. And then here's them, Joshua relying the plan here and telling all the Israelites what to do here. And then first thing, what we notice here is that in verse 3 they say 30,000 men of valor were to set up the ambush that night. 30,000 were used in chapter 7, verse 3 also. It's interesting to notice there. They like the 30,000 is a very important number. Why do you think they would send those 30,000 in the middle of the night instead of in the morning? Why the night?
Set up the place.
Mm-hmm.
Set up the ambush.
Yes, that's a big part of it. The other part is what I heard was basically it needed to be a surprise. So if they did it during the day, everybody could see where they're at and know it's an ambush. But if they did it at night, it's hard to see at night, and most people can't see at night. And I mean, maybe today it's a lot easier, but back then it was really hard to see anybody at night because they had like torches and all, but it wasn't like big lights to where you could just see. And if you've noticed in the movies, everybody likes to do things at night, not in the morning when it comes to like planning strategies. But night's always like a good time to plan things out. But that's basically why they chose to do it at night. And then, as I said there, and then they were to set up at the west side of Ai, as mentioned here, just because it was a really good strategic side where it was basically, it had like a lot of cliffs and a lot of, it was just out of the way from the Ai itself, and it was in like a different town to the next, which my footnotes said that is like near Bethel. So it was basically it was a great place to hide everybody, to where it was hard to detect anything. And but yeah, all this was basically a direct command from God. God set it up to where it'd be at the advantage of Israel, and that it would be a disadvantage to Ai. But what made me thought is that if God gave this commandment, if they missed one, or they messed up a command or didn't do something as God commanded them, would have been possible, or at least would have gone the way it should have. I would say it wouldn't have, just because as we noticed from chapter 7, it was basically a failure because they didn't do what God wanted them to do, which was not take spoils from the treasury like Achan did. So in this point, they basically did everything God said, and knew from Achan's example that if they even mess up or anything, that it'll cost the whole nation of Israel, and also may cost them their lives if they were to get to the bottom of it. But it was an example in chapter 7 why we shouldn't disobey. Next is Joshua 9 through 13. In Joshua 8:13, 9 through 13, it says, Joshua therefore sent them out, and they went to lie in ambush and stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Joshua lodged that night among the people. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning and mustered the people, and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people of war who were with them went up and drew near. And they came before the city and camped on the north side of Ai. Now a valley lay between them and Ai. So he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And when they had set the people, all the army that was on the north of the city, and its rear guard on the west of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. And then, I thought there was a picture here. I guess I didn't. Okay. The way, basically, it gave Israel the advantage, because basically it was they were just sitting there waiting for Joshua to create a distraction so that when basically you get rid of the main forces, then you leave the whole place wide open, which we'll get more into in 14 through 17. But basically, this whole ambush was set up to where Israel had the geographical, or at least they knew their surroundings really well, to where AI had no clue what was going on. So basically, it was very secretive. It was a secret mission that God entrusted to the Israelites. And then basically what gave them this advantage was the rocky heights, as I mentioned earlier. It was just tall enough to where it was hard to see over and see if there was people behind or not. And it wasn't like it was wide open, like flat, like in Oklahoma, where there's hardly anything to hide behind because it's all flat. I would say it's a lot like the Rocky Mountains or down west. Like if you go to the Panhandle, it's probably a lot like that with the Rocky Heights. And then I don't know if it's like the east, like in the southeast, but I just know the rocks were tall enough to where it wasn't like you could just see right away and think, oh, there's people over there, we got to do something. It was more like it probably was like a normal day. You just thought there was troublemakers at the time, and Joshua was supposed to be seen in the next couple of verses. But it was definitely out of sight, to where basically AI didn't even think to make or look to the west, because it wasn't. I mean, it was out of their view, and that there was no way anybody was going to come from there. And then the other was they were in a ravine, as mentioned earlier, and it was between the two. It was like Ai was over here, and then there was Bethel in the next. So, and then moving on, 14 through 17. Now it happened when the king of Ai saw it, that the men of the city hurried and rose early and went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at an appointed place before the plain. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him beyond the city. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them, and fled by the way of the wilderness. So all the people who were in Ai were called together to pursue them. And they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. There was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So they left the city open and pursued Israel. And then basically, here's the distraction. Joshua here was being the distraction, acting like they were defenseless and that there was no way they were going to get beaten, or that Ai was going to lose to Israel. So they acted. I mean, they basically had their somewhat big force, but it looked like a force that wasn't strong enough to be able to take on a strong army of Ai. So basically, in this case, Joshua was the decoy and basically ran out of sight from Ai's main troop, and basically took them out of the city. And all the defense, probably their best defense they had was like a few guards or something to that. It's not specific here. It just says that they basically distracted them far enough to where they were left vulnerable. But yeah, it was only his troops, and they felt like, or they thought they overwhelmed the Israelites at this point, and it basically left Israel wide open to any attack. Basically, it was defenseless. So what those 30,000 we were talking about earlier were doing was they were just waiting until Joshua and everybody cleared out, and then once that was cleared out, they just went right in and attacked and destroyed everything in their path. And what we'll notice later on, that they basically they took the spoils and kept that, and then also allowed the cattle to survive during this time period, or this time, and just killed everybody that was in sight, and destroyed Ai. And as mentioned earlier, it was supposed to be destroyed by fire, and so keep that in mind as we get close to the next couple of verses about the fire that will consume Ai.
I find it interesting that in verse 17, there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel. So they were, obviously very close to each other. They were together in this battle. We don't read anything happening in Bethel yet, but there's a lot of people chasing them.
Yes. They basically, God was the mastermind behind it, but all what Joshua did was followed God's commandments, and it made we know that God was smart, and Joshua was really good at managing the army to be able to accomplish something like this, because it wouldn't have been easy if they didn't have God's help, or at least I don't think they would have came up with a similar plan like God's if he wasn't there. But including from that, moving on through verses 18 through 23. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand." And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. So those in ambush arose quickly out of their place. They ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered the city and took it, and hurried to set the city on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended to heaven, so that they had no power to flee this way or that way. And the people who had fled to the wilderness turned back on the pursuers. Now when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. Then the others came out of the city against them, so they were caught in the midst of Israel, some of them this side and some on that side. And they struck them down, so that they let none of them remain or escape. But the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua. And then if you see that spear right there, there is a lot of symbolism with that, but also it is literal about the spear, but also there's a lot of symbolism behind the spear in that case. And then there's the fire. They saw the fire and the smoke, which was like it was a communication system, or like telegraph for them. But then before I get into that, so basically the spear was mentioned. It symbolizes war here, which is a sign of the beginning of the hostilities. So going back to 14 through 17, basically Joshua and the army was playing defense, which was to help to protect themselves, but also to lure out the off and get the Ai and Bethel armies to play offense and try to catch them. So they basically run out and dare Ai to catch them. And basically once they saw the sign, once they saw the sign and waited for the fire and smoke for everybody to burn everything down within the city, they basically after they saw it, it was like a communication, or it was like a telegram telling them, "We've conquered the city. Now it's time to play offense." So it can also the spear can also be seen as as Joshua getting ready to play offense, as instead of having to run away, now they can go charge at the Ai soldiers as they try to flee, because they realize that their city's been destroyed, and that there was and the positive thing here, and what's encouraging to the Israelites and what helps with their morale is that instead of Ai chasing them, they're basically trying to run away. And not only they try to run away, but also the exits for them, some of them can't even find a way to get out. There's really no escape from the Israelites. So most of them almost all of them are killed, except for the king in this section.
They were caught in the middle of it. They didn't have a place to go to get away from it.
Right.
Because they come out of the city after them, and then Joshua turned back and ran toward them, and they were just caught right there in the middle between the two forces, and with no place to go. They had to stand and fight. We know that the Lord's side was going to win.
God was the reason why they had high morale and were able to overconquer the armies that were getting caught in the middle of the battle. But it was very encouraging for the Israelites in this situation. And oops. Looks like I already went through that. And then, but yeah, as I said, the only person they kept alive was the king of Ai. Before, or you're probably thinking, didn't King Saul do something like this? Kept the animals, the sheep, and then kept the king of the Amalekites alive. Some people might say this is contradictory, or this is hypocritical of God to allow Joshua and the people to allow the king of Ai to live. However, there is a difference, as this time God allowed the people to keep the spoils and also to keep cattle alive. However, they weren't going to do what King Saul was going to do with the king of the Amalekites. So we'll see why there's a difference in verse 29 in the next section. And then continuing on in verse 24 through 29. And it came to pass when Israel had made an ending of slaying all the inhabitants of Ai in the field in the wilderness where they pursued them, and when they all had fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, that all the Israelites returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. So it was that all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand, with which he stretched out the spear, until he had utterly destroyed the inhabitants of Ai. Only the livestock and spoil of that city Israel took as booty for themselves, according to the word of the Lord which he had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever, a desolation to this day. And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until evening. And as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his corpse down from the tree, cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raise it over a great heap of stones that remains to this day. And as you see here, they captured the king of Ai here and are about to hang him.
It's hard for us as Christians, under the concept of the law of love and grace, to consider the fact that God would have his people utterly destroy another people. And people think that there must be two different gods. The God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. But God could have performed a miracle and done all of this without Israel doing it. The point is they had to work and earn every square inch of the ground they were in. It was to teach them a lesson. And it was a lesson hard learned, but important in God's plan.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the point of Christianity, and as the Old Testament shows, and I think it's a good example for Christians to take in consideration that God's not just going to hand us blessings, or at least He's not going to allow us to just get something out of no work. He expects us to put in effort, and also to put in the time to know His word, or in this case in Israel, for the Israelites to do as God commands them. And for us, if we do as God commands us, then we'll be rewarded for doing what He wants us to do, and to also conquer anything in our lives that is holding us back. And for the Israelites, what was holding them back, they were able to conquer that, and to be able to earn the victory and conquer Ai here.
I don't know whether it had any part in it or not, but I wonder, since he told them to destroy all of them, and he's done this before, we know that they were told, do not marry among the other peoples of the land. This might have been a way
Yes, I think what God was trying to do here was, by annihilating, was just to get rid of the influence of falling away from God, or at least not doing what He commands, or being around people that aren't willing or wanting to change to be able to help you follow God. Today, instead of having us annihilate people, instead He wants us to try our best to convert, but also not to. But if they're not willing to, just move on, or at least don't or allow our company to hang around bad influences, in which in many verses the apostles encourage Christians to not surround ourselves with influences of the world, but influences of Christ, and to be around fellow Christians.
Brennan, I think you read before Joshua that the sins of these 7 nations in Canaan had gotten so bad that God's judgment was on them. And that's why that was one of the reasons He wanted them completely wiped out, because their sins had gotten so bad that really there was no hope for them. It's almost like you can look back to the ark and think about that. Mankind had gone in such gravity that God was wiping them away and basically starting over with Noah. Same thing here, because if you see those people that are outside Canaan, they're not told to totally destroy. In fact, they're told, go to them. If they give you a peace treaty and they surrender, they can live. But if they don't, then destroy them. But everybody within, and the second reason, like he said, was the influence of them would ultimately, what you said, would cause them to go astray, which the people they left alive did cause them to go astray. And it's the same thing we're today. You go to 1 Corinthians 5. The church is basically, again, Israel, and we're supposed to, if we have a brother in open sin, we're to disfellowship them, number one, to keep the church pure, and number two, hopefully they'll change their mind and repent and come back. So it's just fascinating how it all works. Certainly the punishments are different because we're in the law of grace now, Christ's law. So
That was a really good illustration there. Basically, Noah wiping out the uncleanliness or the sin there, and then Joshua here just removing all the nations that aren't willing to be peaceful and will resort to violence. In this case, Jericho and Ai resorted to violence in this case, and it was important that they had to get rid of this influence, but they didn't fully get rid of the bad influences. There was nations out there that weren't good influence. Then moving on into these verses, can't see that much. Everything God commanded in verse 2 was fulfilled, even sparing the spoils and cattle. Verse 28 shows that Ai means ruin. There we go. Ai here means ruin. Like Jericho, this is a memorial to Israel's victory. The Hebrew word heap or mound is tel, as in the place name Tel Abib. In Ezekiel 3:15, talks about Tel Abib, as Ai was in rubble and just completely destroyed and burned by fire. The execution of King Ai in this was a lot like Canaan's. I don't think they stoned the king of Ai, but they did hang the king of Ai. And in Achan's case, they also not only did they stone him, but they also hanged him as well. Hanging was like a way of showing the shame for somebody. It was just used as an example to tell other Israelites, don't be in this situation. And plus, the king of Ai wasn't very friendly towards the Israelites in their first encounter, as he was pretty much mocked and didn't say nice things about Israel. And in Israel tradition, as we see in the New Testament when Jesus was hanged on the cross, and in Deuteronomy, that a body wasn't to be left overnight, or in the case of Jesus, when Jesus was hanged, they weren't supposed to leave. They didn't want to leave them at the cross because they would have to work on the Sabbath in that case. But as tradition showed in Deuteronomy 21 through 23, I believe in that verse said that they weren't supposed to leave somebody overnight or leave somebody hanged overnight. So they just took his body off the tree or where they hanged. And then Joshua 19:31, they just took down, or they just broke the legs of the two thieves next to Jesus, and then for Jesus they just pierced his side with a spear, as it was predicted in the Old Testament, and they were able to take their bodies down. And just for time's sake, we'll move on. In Joshua 8:30 through 35, just to give a brief overview of that, they basically were supposed to build an altar and do peace offering and burnt offerings and peace offerings on Mount Ebal, which was commanded from Deuteronomy 27:5. They were supposed to build that, and then they were supposed to do burnt offerings and peace offerings that were required from the first law of Moses, as you can find in Exodus 20:24. And on Mount Ebal, Deuteronomy 27:6 through 7, the process of Joshua was supposed to copy and read to the people the law of Moses, as said in Deuteronomy 27:3. When Joshua and Israel did everything God said, then it was good. In conclusion, basically, if you just do what God tells you or commands you to do, and not try to argue or try to find ways to cut corners, then God's going to bless you. He'll reward you for your obedience to Him, and never question what God commands, because sometimes He's looking out for your best interests and is getting rid of all the bad influences. So this week, let's do our best to follow what God wants us to do, and make sure that we make our halftime adjustments whenever things fall away or fall apart or aren't going our way, or maybe it's just something that's in your life that's holding you back, or just causing you not to glorify God, and God might not be with you because of that problem. So make that adjustment and remove the sin that's within you, and God will bless you beyond measure. Thank you.